Some of these trucks hauled artillery through the mud of Normandy, dragged broken tanks off the burning sand of North Africa, and kept entire armies alive when everything else broke down. Then the war ended, and they refused to die. They logged mountains, built highways, and ground through construction sites for another 30, 40, even 50 years. The men who built them are long gone. The nations they fought for changed forever, but these 10 machines kept running. Here's how. Number 1. GMC CCKW 353. Let's start with the one that arguably won the war on wheels. The GMC CCKW was a 2.5-ton, 6-wheel drive cargo truck built by Yellow Truck & Coach, General Motors Truck Division, from 1941 to 1945. Soldiers called it the Jimmy, or, more famously, the Deuce and a Half, because of that 2.5-ton rating. The name in the letters isn't random. The first C meant it was a 1941 design, the second C meant a conventional cab, the K meant all-wheel drive, and the W meant tandem rear axles. Under the hood sat the GMC 270 cubic inch inline 6, an overhead valve engine making around 91 horsepower. That doesn't sound like much today, but paired with a 5-speed gearbox and a 2-range transfer case, it would crawl through mud, sand and snow while carrying its own weight, and then some. Here's where it earned immortality. In the late summer of 1944, after the Normandy breakout, the Allies had armies racing across France faster than the railroads could supply them. The answer was the Red Ball Express, a non-stop truck convoy that at its peak ran nearly 6,000 vehicles and moved roughly 12,500 tons of supplies every single day. The backbone of that convoy was the Deuce. Production numbers are staggering. Depending on how you count the variants, GM built well over 500,000 of these 2.5-ton trucks. One commonly cited figure is around 562,750. It came in dozens of body styles: cargo, dump, tanker, workshop van, even the amphibious DUKW. And it didn't stop in 1945. The CCKW soldiered on through the Korean War, served into the mid-1960s in U.S. hands, and was handed down to Allied armies all over the world. Eisenhower himself is famously quoted as naming the 2.5-ton truck among the handful of machines most responsible for Allied victory. Not bad for a truck most people have never heard of. Number 2. Studebaker US6. While GMC's Deuce supplied the Western Allies, another 2.5-ton truck was quietly holding the Eastern Front together. The Studebaker US6 looked similar to the CCKW, same tonnage class, same 6x6 layout, but its story went in a completely different direction. When the US standardized its 2.5-ton production, the plan was simple. GMC's trucks went to the U.S. Army, International Harvester built for the Navy and Marines, and Studebaker's output was earmarked almost entirely for Lend-Lease, shipping to America's allies. Studebaker built roughly 197,000 US6 trucks between 1941 and 1945, powered by a Hercules inline 6 making about 94 horsepower, backed by a 5-speed transmission and 2-speed transfer case. The overwhelming majority went to the Soviet Union, delivered mostly through the Persian corridor, offloaded at ports in Iran, assembled, loaded with cargo, and driven north through the Caucasus into the USSR. Soviet troops couldn't pronounce Studebaker, so they called it the Studder. They also called it the King of the Roads. They loved it for one reason above all: it just worked. It ran on the poor quality fuel the Red Army often had. It took brutal punishment on the Russian steppe, and it kept going. The Soviets found it made an ideal platform for something terrifying: the BM-13 Katyusha rocket launcher, the Stalin's organ that rained rockets on German positions. The very first mobile Katyusha rocket projectors used by the Soviet Army rode on truck platforms like these. The legend runs deep. One Soviet artilleryman wrote that the Studebaker deserved a monument like the ones built for the T-34 tank. Stalin reportedly sent a personal note of thanks to Studebaker's leadership, and its influence outlived the war by decades. When the Soviets designed their own post-war trucks, the ZS-151 and the machines that followed, they leaned heavily on lessons learned from the Studder. A truck built in South Bend, Indiana, ended up shaping Soviet industry for a generation. Number 3. Diamond T Model 968. Now we get into the heavy iron, and into a name most people have completely forgotten: Diamond T. The company started in Chicago in 1905, and by 1911 it had pivoted entirely to trucks. During the war, it built some of the toughest heavy vehicles America produced. The Model 968 was a 4-ton 6x6 truck carrying the Army designation G509. Diamond T built prototypes in 1940, standardized the 968 in 1941, and rolled them out of their Chicago plant. Over the course of the war, they produced more than 30,000 of these 4-ton chassis, and Diamond T supplied the military with just over 50,000 vehicles overall. Power came from a Hercules RXC, a big 529 cubic inch inline-6 making somewhere around 106 to 131 horsepower depending on the exact model, mated to a 5-speed transmission with a 2-range transfer case. Most were fitted with a front-mounted Garwood winch pulling up to 15,000 pounds on 300 feet of steel cable, one of the strongest recovery setups on any standard Army truck. The basic cargo version was a prime mover. It towed the 155mm howitzer, hauled the gun crew, and carried the ammunition, with a pintle hitch rated to drag 25,000 pounds on the road. But the chassis really earned its keep in another form. The Model 969 wrecker, fitted with a Holmes twin-boom recovery rig, became the standard medium wrecker of the U.S. Army. When a truck went into a ditch, this is what came to pull it out. And here's the outlived everything part. These trucks were so overbuilt that they were still turning up in service long after the war they were designed for. Diamond T968s were photographed still working in the Long Binh depot yards in Vietnam in the mid-1960s, more than 20 years after the first ones rolled off the Chicago line. Number 4. Diamond T980981. Diamond T earns a second spot on this list because it built something even bigger and even longer lived. In 1940, the British Purchasing Commission came shopping in America. Britain needed a truck that could recover and haul its heaviest tanks, and Diamond T had exactly the right heavy chassis. A few modifications later, the Model 980 was born. This was a 12-ton, 6x4 prime mover with a diesel Hercules engine making roughly 185 horsepower, a heavy ballast box behind the cab, and a monstrous Garwood winch rated at 40,000 pounds. That's 20 tons of pulling power. Coupled to a Fruhoff trailer, the whole rig, known to the U.S. Army as the M19, could carry a 40-ton load. Production started in 1941, and the first ones reached Britain in 1942. They went straight into the desert with the British 8th Army in North Africa, and they were a revelation. Battle-damaged tanks had to be dragged off the battlefield, often under fire, and returned to workshops. The Diamond T, with a trained Royal Army Service Corps crew, could do it in the worst conditions the desert could throw at it. It could haul a 38-ton Churchill, Britain's heaviest tank, or a 32-ton Sherman. By the time production ended in 1945, around 6,500 had been built, and roughly 2,000 went to the British Army. They became the British Army's premier tank transporter, used in virtually every theater of the war. But this is the part that belongs on this list. When the British finally replaced them with the Thornycroft Antor in the early 1950s, the old Diamond Cs didn't get scrapped. They went to work. Heavy haulage firms snapped them up. Winds ran about 30 of them, Pickfords a dozen more, dragging enormous industrial loads up and down Britain's roads. Some kept working for another 30 years. A truck designed to survive the Desert War ended up hauling transformers and boilers into the 1970s. Number 5. Mack NO. You can't make a list of tough 1940s trucks without Mack, and the wildest of Mack's wartime designs was the NO. This was a 7.5-ton, 6x6 prime mover, carrying the designation G532, and it was built for one job, moving artillery so heavy that ordinary trucks couldn't budge it. Mack started developing it in 1940. The Army wanted a tractor that could tow the 155mm long tom gun, the 8-inch howitzer, the 8-inch gun, and the enormous 240mm howitzer. To prove it could do the job, in January 1942, a Mack NO towed the first 240mm howitzer carriage from Mack's plant in South Milwaukee, Wisconsin, a distance of roughly 900 miles, down to the Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland. The heart of it was Mack's own EY engine, a 707 cubic inch inline-6 making 159 horsepower and a stump pulling 534 pound-feet of torque. A 5-speed transmission, dual-range transfer case, and full 6-wheel drive meant it could crawl over almost anything with up to 50,000 pounds behind it. Standard equipment included a front-mounted Garwood winch rated at 40,000 pounds, plus a hoist in the bed used to lift artillery gun trails during hookup. Only about 2,050 were built between 1942 and 1945, a tiny number compared to the Deuce, because you simply didn't need many trucks this specialized. Nearly 1,100 of them were shipped out under Lend-Lease. The NO's legacy lived on in Mack's post-war designs. When the U.S. Army wrote a requirement in 1949 for a new family of extra-heavy 10-ton 6x6 trucks, Mack won it, and their winning design was directly influenced by the wartime NO. That became the M123 and M125, trucks that served all the way into the 1990s. The DNA of a 1940s artillery tractor was still on active duty half a century later. Number 6. White 666. Here's a truck built by so many companies it's almost a committee project. The design started with Corbett, a small North Carolina firm that had been selling trucks to the U.S. Army since 1917. Their 6-ton 6x6 chassis, the Model 50 SD6, was standardized in 1941, but Corbett was too small to build them all, so the government brought in the White Motor Company to help. White called their nearly identical version the Model 666, 6 tons, 6 wheels, 6-wheel drive, and it didn't stop there. Brockway built the same truck as the B666, so did the 4-wheel drive auto company, so did Ward LaFrance. 5 different manufacturers, 1 standardized military design. Add up the whole 6-ton family, and the total comes to a remarkable 219,882 units. Power came from a Hercules HXD engine making around 202 horsepower, driving through a 4-speed transmission with a 2-range transfer case. With a centrally mounted winch and pintle hooks on both the front and rear, it could pull heavy loads from either direction, perfect for its main job as an artillery prime mover. But the 6-ton chassis was a shapeshifter. It served as a cargo hauler, a fuel tanker, a crane and shovel carrier, and, most impressively, as a bridge erection truck, carrying and placing the pontoon and treadway bridging that let armies cross rivers under fire. What makes it a legend of durability is how little it needed to change. The mechanical components were so well engineered that they stayed virtually unchanged from the 1941 specification right through to the end of the war. When the military finally retired the 6-ton class, it wasn't because the trucks wore out. It was because a new generation, the M54 5-ton 6x6, arrived in the 1950s. The 666 didn't fail, it was simply outlasted by the next design it helped make possible. Number 7. Kenworth 573. Today, Kenworth is one of the most respected names in American trucking, but in the early 1940s, it was a relatively small operation, and World War II is a big part of why that changed. When the Army Ordnance Corps laid out its complete line of wartime tactical trucks, it needed a heavy wrecker, a 10-ton 6x6 recovery truck strong enough to drag disabled trucks, tanks, and equipment out of the worst situations imaginable. The design work came from Corbett, and the production contracts went to 2 firms, Ward LaFrance and Kenworth. The result was officially the heavy wrecking truck M1, and later the improved M1A1. Kenworth's version, the Model 573, was powered by a Continental 22R engine making 145 horsepower, running through a 5-speed transmission and 2-range transfer case. It could hit about 45 miles per hour on the road, and its recovery boom and winches could handle the heaviest jobs the Army faced. Between the 2 builders, 5,765 of these wreckers were produced from 1941 to 1945. Ward LaFrance built the lion's share, about 4,925 of them. Kenworth, which only got going in 1942 and dealt with manufacturing interruptions, built around 840. This became the standard heavy wrecker of the U.S. Army through the entire war, serving in every theater, the truck that recovered all the other trucks. For Kenworth, the war was transformative. Building thousands of rugged, heavy-duty military vehicles cemented its reputation and its manufacturing muscle. The company came out of the 1940s positioned to become one of the giants of the post-war heavy truck industry, a position it holds to this day. The wrecker itself was eventually replaced by 5-ton wreckers in the 1950s, but the reputation it built for Kenworth genuinely outlived everything. Number 8. Mack L series. Not every truck on this list wore olive drab. Mack's L series was a civilian heavy hauler, and it might be the purest example of outlived everything here. because it was designed to be nearly indestructible, and it spent decades proving it. Introduced in 1940 and built all the way through 1956, the L Series carried the classic upright, squared-off American truck look, and Mack barely changed it for 16 years. There was a reason. These trucks were sent primarily to the West Coast, where the roads were rough, the grades were steep, and the loads were merciless. Loggers and mining outfits needed a truck that would pull enormous weight up a mountain and survive coming back down. The range covered several models, the lighter LF and LH and the heavier LJ, LM, and the big LT. Many were powered by Mack's own N672 diesel, a 672 cubic inch inline-six making around 165 horsepower and famous for its deep guttural exhaust note. Others ran Mack gasoline engines or Cummins diesels. West Coast versions used lightweight aluminum body components to squeeze out every extra pound of payload. Across the whole run, roughly 35,000 L Series Macks were built, and what mattered wasn't horsepower or speed, it was brute durability. The sheet metal was thick, the frames were heavy. These were trucks built for pulling power and endurance, not grace, and loggers spoke about their LTs with genuine affection. They soldiered on long past their production years. Because they were so overbuilt, L Series Macks kept working the timber roads and job sites of the American West for decades, some still being found parked, weathered, but structurally intact more than half a century later. When the L Series finally ended in 1956, Mack replaced it with the B Series, a truck line so successful it ran into the 1960s. But the old L, timeless from the day it launched, simply refused to disappear. Number 9. Isuzu TX now crossed the Pacific because the single longest-lived truck on this entire list is Japanese. The Isuzu TX series is a masterclass in a design so right that it stayed in production for the better part of half a century. The TX first appeared in 1934 as Isuzu's first genuinely successful heavy-duty truck. It shared its chassis with the BX bus and traced its roots back to an earlier Isuzu bus from 1929. It could be ordered with either a gasoline or a diesel engine, and it proved endlessly adaptable, serving as a cargo hauler, a dump truck, a tank truck, a fire engine, and more. Production ran through World War II. The Japanese military considered domestic truck production vital to national defense, and then, remarkably, it just kept going. After a wartime pause, the TX went back into production in 1946 and continued being built, in evolving forms, all the way until 1979. Think about that timeline. This was a truck whose basic lineage was on sale before World War II and was still rolling out of factories the same year the Sony Walkman appeared. It survived Japan's wartime collapse, the post-war occupation, and the entire economic miracle that turned Japan into an industrial superpower. Through all of it, the TX remained a dependable workhorse across Asia, its rugged simplicity making it easy to keep running in places where fancier machinery would have died. Very few vehicle designs of any kind, car, truck, or otherwise, can claim a 45-year production life. The Isuzu TX is one of the rare exceptions. If the theme of this list is trucks that outlived everything around them, the TX might be the outright champion. It didn't just outlive the 1940s, it outlived several entire eras. Number 10. Autocar U series. We'll finish with a truck from the oldest name in the business. The Autocar company was founded back in 1897, making it one of the oldest motor vehicle brands in America. And, remarkably, Autocar still builds severe-duty trucks today. Durability isn't a marketing slogan for them. It's the entire company. During the war, Autocar built a family of heavy four-wheel drive tractors, the U series, and they looked different from almost everything else on this list. They used a cab-over engine design. The cab sat right on top of the engine, with a short, stubby nose, which kept the truck compact while maximizing the load it could pull. The two main versions were the U7-1444T, a 4 to 5 ton tractor, and the larger, heavier U8-1444T, officially rated as a 5 to 6 ton 4x4 ponton tractor truck. Under that cab-over hood sat a Hercules RXC engine, driving through a 5-speed gearbox and 2-range transfer case. Autocar built around 11,000 of the U7-1444T and roughly 2,700 of the bigger U8-1444T. Their jobs were the heavy, unglamorous, essential ones. towing long flatbed trailers, hauling fuel tankers, dragging pontoon bridging to river crossings, and carrying the van bodies that housed early warning radar systems like the SCR-270. White Motor Company even built a near-exact copy, the White 444T. The cab-over layout mattered beyond the war. As American highway trucking exploded in the post-war years, length limits made cab-over designs increasingly valuable. You could fit more trailer into the same overall length. The wartime autocars were an early rugged proof of the concept that would dominate American highways for decades. And Autocar itself is the ultimate outlived everything story. It survived the Great Depression, both world wars, and more than a century of a brutal consolidating industry that swallowed almost every other name on this list. Diamond T, White, Corbett, Brockway, Ward LaFrance, Studebaker, most are long gone. Autocar is still building trucks, more than 125 years after it started. If you want a part 2, because there are plenty more, from the Bedford QL to the Federal Heavies to the Canadian military pattern trucks, say the word in the comments and tell me which forgotten truck you'd put on the list.